We're going to start with creating the interior of our magazine document. The magazine is sized 8 3/8 by 10 7/8, and that works out to 8.375 by 10.875. So we'll go to Command N or File and New Document. We'll change the units to inches and enter 8.375 by 10.875, which I already have entered here. Our orientation is going to be portrait, and we'll enter 32 pages, which is a multiple of 4. That may be more pages needed for a prototype, and it may not be enough pages for a full magazine. If you have to remove pages or add pages, you want to make sure that you end up with a multiple of 4. So if you need to remove any pages in this case, if you can end up at that multiple of 4, that's ideal. And then if you're adding pages, you want to make sure you're at a multiple of 4 because of the way magazines bind. If they're saddle stitched, they're sheets, and each sheet contains 4 pages. So we don't want to end up with any blank pages. We'll turn on facing pages since this is a bound document. We're going to leave the start page at 1. We'll leave primary text frame turned off. A primary text frame essentially adds an initial text frame into the document. And we'll make our columns, because we're going to be working along the 12 columns and 12 rows document setup. We're going to set these at 12. So 12 columns will maintain the default gutter of 0.1667. And that works out to approximately 3 millimeters, maybe a bit more. And margins we're going to set to 0.75 all the way around. And that's going to allow enough room for folio information and page numbers. We'll set the bleed to 0.125. If yours is at 0, you can just do 1 click up, and that will set them all as long as you have that link selected. Slug, we don't need to worry about that. And if you want to see what this is going to do, you can select preview, and that'll give you a preview of what you're going to get, or you can just select create. I'm just going to move this into my window. There we go. All right, so we have showing on all pages the 12 columns that we set. But we want to add in now the 12 rows. So when we do this, we're adding guides. We're going to be adding the rows through guides. You can't yet add rows in the document setup. So we have to do this manually after we've initially set up the document. So we're going to go to the master, because we want these guides to happen throughout the document. We don't want them to just be on one page or one spread. So we'll double click on the master page in the pages panel. And if you don't have the pages panel, you go to window and pages. I'll double click on that master. That brings the master into view. I'll go to layout, create guides. And in rows, we're going to set that to 12. We'll leave the gutter the same that we did in the document setup. We're not going to be doing any columns here because we've already done them. And we're going to have the guides fit to the margins. You can, of course, set them to fit to your pages if you want, and that can be actually helpful if you're working with page numbers, depending on where you want to place them. So in this case, actually, I'll leave it. It's a little different than the columns at the moment, but that's fine. And if we had any existing guides, if we had been working with this document previously and brought some guides down from the rulers, we could select remove existing guides, and it would clear those out prior to putting these new rows in place. So we'll say OK. And I'll just go back to the first page here. So you can see throughout the document, we have the rows and the columns, and that's going to help guide us in our design setup. Now, if you want to make any adjustments to this, you can go back to layout and to margins and columns, and we can change the number of columns, we can change the gutter width, we can even adjust our margins. And if we want to change the number of guides, we go to layout, create guides again, but then in this case we do have to, of course, eliminate all of the existing ones before we add a new set if we're doing a revision to the set. But we can also go right into the document, make sure that the guides from the view menu, make sure that the guides are unlocked. Right now they are. It's saying I can lock them. So we can actually select guides. If I go back to my master, I can select those guides and I can move them or I can delete them altogether. But in this case, we're happy with what we have, so we're going to leave that. I'll go back to page 1. And one thing we want to make sure of when we're working with a document like this is that we are using master pages for that common content such as page numbers and folio items, but at the same time, we want that content to be on its, we want it to be above our work. So when we start working here on page 1, we'll be covering up any folio or master or page numbers, any of those items on the master page. So we're going to go to the master page, and we're first going to add some automatic page numbers. If you have folio items that will be going on every page, or for the most part going on every page throughout the document, you would put them on the master. And when you need to remove them, we can easily override the master. We'll see how to do that. So the idea behind the master is essentially, if it's going to be on most of the pages, and yeah, you may know that it's not going to be on some, add it to the master, let it travel throughout the entire document. And then if you have a smaller amount of pages that are not going to have those items, it's easy to remove them, and you're not having to do any of the addition of these items manually as you work through the magazine. So it's part of efficiency and just really making our lives a little easier. So I'm going to put automatic page numbers on this. First thing I'm going to do is make a text frame, and we don't have to get these exactly in place, but we do want to get the page numbers on the spread. So we're looking at the left and right pages of a spread. We want to get those in the same spot so that even if we do move them later, we know that for now they're exactly the same from left to right. So I'm just going to make a text frame here, and you can see the dotted pattern of that text frame, the dotted border. That's indicating that that's on the master. So whenever you see that, even if you go to unlock something on the master, you'll see that dotted line, and that's just that indication that it's locked, it's within the master, and when we're in the interior pages, it's not accessible. So that's why we do have to do that override where we unlock it. So I'll go to type, and insert special character, markers, and we're going to insert a current page number. So that's essentially putting some code into the document. We're on the A master. You can see here it's indicating A master. So it's going to actually insert the letter A, a caps A, into that type frame. That A itself is coded into the program. So you don't want to just put the letter A. That's not going to work. That's just going to put a letter A throughout your entire document. You want to make sure that you're choosing the markers, and the A that shows up is just a reflection of the code. It's just how that's showing. So I'll do current page number, and there's that A. And then I'll just get this located where I think I may want it. Of course, it can be moved later, and you can do anything you want with page numbers. You can even do them differently on each page, but typically in a magazine that's quite structured like this, they're going to be down in that lower left. We want to keep them within a 1/4 inch from the page edge, so we don't want them to come within a 1/4 inch of the page edge. We want them to be at least a 1/4 of an inch away from the page edge. So now I want to make sure that I have this in the exact same spot on the right. So I'm going to actually pull this text frame down to the, I'll pull it down to the bleed, and I'm going to move it over to the other bleed. And I'm just anchoring it in a spot so that now I can do a count that I can reflect on the right side. So it's moved down to bleed and bleed, side and bottom. And I'm going to hold Shift down and I'll hit my right arrow. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that looks like an okay place for it for now. So now I can copy and paste. I can Option click and drag to clone it. Whatever I do, I want to get a copy of that exact text frame. I don't want to make another. I want to use this exact one so I know that it's the correct size. And I'm going to go over to this bleed. So it's the same frame, a copy of it, and it's moved over to the right side. And in my paragraph settings, so I'm just going to get my cursor in here and highlight that A. So Command A selected it. Command A is select all. And I'm just going to give that alignment of right. And then I'll do the same thing. Hold Shift down and hit my left arrow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think it was. I'll make sure. Looks like it was maybe 4. Yeah. So now I know that these, as a spread, these are in the exact same spot. So if I choose to move them or need to move them, I would select both when I come back to the master, and I would move them the same amount. If they had to go in, I do one and I keep track of that amount. That's why the Shift and arrow keys are helpful, because it's a larger increment, but we can also do that count. You can even do the count if you use the arrow keys without the Shift, but it's smaller increments. So now those are the first items on our master. As I said, you might have folio items and other items that are going to be consistent throughout the magazine. We have our rows applied to the master as well, the guides that are going across there. So I'm actually going to go up, while I'm thinking of it, to the View menu, to Grids and Guides. I'm going to lock the guides. I'm probably not going to need to move them, so it's just best to keep them locked and avoid any inadvertent deletion or movement of them. Now, those items being on the master, if I go into a page and start working on it, and we can of course test those items, those page numbers, by going into the pages and just making sure they show and that they're showing the correct numbers so they're working. But if I go in to start working on something, and for example I put a full page image or ad on this page, it's going to end up covering the master page items. You have to almost look at master page items upon initially making them as being set into the paper itself, right into the page. So anything that we put on the master page or on the page, once we're off of the master page and working in the interior here, that's going to go on top of master page items. So what we do to avoid that is move the master page items to their own layer. So I'm going to go into the layers panel, and I'm going to click the new layer icon here, and that's going to make a new layer on top. I'll go back to my master page, and you'll have to do this for any additional items that you put on the master, but we're going to do it with those items we have on it now, which is just 2 page numbers. And I can do Command A to select all, or I can drag across them, or I can click one and hold Shift and click the next. Either way, I want to get all of those items selected. And in our layers panel, we can see on layer 1, the little blue box there is indicating that on this layer there are items selected. We're going to drag that little blue box to the next layer. So now they're on that top layer, and that's what we want. We want the master page items on top. And we're going to name that layer. And we'll name it master page, and we'll be very clear, items. We'll say OK. And the master page items are, once we're in the interior, they're locked. You can see a little dotted line around them. That's saying they're on the master, they're locked. We can't select them or do anything with them. So we also want to go to that layer, the master page items layer that we just created, and put those items on, and we're going to lock that too. Because we don't want to accidentally work on it. We don't want to do anything that's going to disrupt those master page items, because now they're on a layer that's basically going to remain at the top of any layers that we put in here. If we add additional layers, that should remain on top. Now, if we need to make any adjustments to those master page items, we can of course go on to the master page, but now they're on a locked layer. So we want to make sure that we unlock that layer. Right now I can't do anything to them. They're on a locked layer. So they're kind of double locked when we're in the interior, because there's a lock on the layer and they're locked because they are on the master. But on the master, when we go into there, they're only locked by that layer. So we'll unlock it, and then we have the freedom to move them and adjust them if we want to. And of course, we want to unlock that layer if we're going to be adding more to the master pages. And if I want to, from the interior, if I want to make an adjustment to that, for example, if we have an ad, a full page ad, and we need to remove page numbers and folio items altogether, we want to make sure again that that master page items layer is unlocked. And then we're going to do Command Shift, so holding Command and Shift down, or if it's a PC, it's Control Shift, and click. So Command Shift, click will unlock any master page items. And then we can delete them, we can adjust them, size them, we can do anything we want with them. And even if we delete that master page item, in this case, page numbers, automatic page numbers, it won't throw off the sequence of page numbers throughout the document. So I can delete the 2 on this page, and this page and those that follow will still remain in the same proper sequence. So to override those locked master page items, it's Command Shift, click, and we do want to make sure that we have the master page layer locked. Once we've made any revisions to those items and we're done with that, we want to definitely go back and lock again that master page layer so that we don't do any inadvertent working on it or moving anything around, because now that's unlocked. We'll click on layer 1, and then that's where we'll add our artwork.